The company in their statement said would never knowingly put a minor in harm's way. This individual's age and identity were misrepresented in the paperwork. Really kind of gross, putting the blame on this child. Here's another regular segment that we're going to be doing, Boss Watch. As we mentioned last week, we want to regularly bring you this segment because every night on the nightly news, you're going to see some poor and working person's mugshot for a crime that they allegedly committed, whether that be theft, trespassing, something like this. Of course, when you get arrested, you have not been convicted. You're innocent until proven guilty, and yet your name and your face are splattered all over the evening news and online, and it has, in fact, impacted people's employment opportunities even when they have been acquitted or charges dropped, right? And so this is something that's happening every day, and yet you don't see the same kind of thing happening to the bosses, who, by the way, it is a fact, steal more from workers than all other property crime combined when you take a look at wage theft, who kill almost as many people as are murdered in this country. Alabama has a homicide rate of 6.2 per 100,000. Our death on the job rate is 5.5 per 100,000. So every time you see a murderer's mugshot, you should be seeing a boss's mugshot in the next segment, but you don't, and that's why we're here. This week, the choice was obvious and tragic. There's no way to segue into this terrible story of a 16-year-old dying on the job in Mississippi. And so before we even get into the details, let's just start. We're going to start by extending our love, our solidarity, and our sympathy to the family. Our labor movement needs to support the family and community however we can. Nobody should ever die on the job, and especially not a child. This young man should have been worried about his grades in school, going to high school sports games, going to prom, making friends, and instead the family has to bury a child. It's just really grievous, and I mean, just I can't imagine what they're going through. I have somebody in my life just recently died, but it was not on the job. He was a young person, and and the family is still, that family is obviously wrecked. And so I've kind of been able to, see recently the kind of sorrow and grief that a family has to go to when they lose somebody so young. And it's really, really sad. And not one more child should have to die due to this, reckless corporate greed. And yet Republicans across the country are trying to make this exact kind of thing easier.
Right.
So let's talk about it. From NPR, 16-year-old Duvan Robert Thomas Perez died while on the job at the Marjack Poultry plant in Hattiesburg, Mississippi last Friday. Forest County Deputy Coroner Lisa Clem confirmed the where and when of Perez's death, but said she couldn't release specific details at the request of the family. In a press release obtained by NPR, however, Marjack Poultry said that a sanitation employee in the plant suffered a fatal injury when he, quote, became entangled in one of the machines he was cleaning. According to the statement, the plant immediately notified the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and an investigation was launched with the company's full cooperation. We'll see if that's the case. The statement did not mention Perez by name. Immigrant Alliance for Justice and Equity spokesperson Jess Manriquez told NPR that Perez and his family are indigenous Guatemalans who immigrated approximately 6 years ago. She said that, quote, when workers are put in these conditions that are truly deplorable. We've been hearing from folks on the ground that there is a lot of child labor that is happening at that poultry plant. So there's a lot that needs to be investigated. But right now, we just want to help this family through the process. The company in their statement said, quote, Marjack, Mississippi would never knowingly put any employee, and certainly not a minor, in harm's way. But it appears at this point in the investigation that this individual's age and identity were misrepresented in the paperwork. Really kind of gross stuff, putting the blame on this child when you're a company. And, this kind of, we know that that's a lie, right? We would never put anybody in harm's way. We would never employ a child. That's just, there's no way that you can believe that unless you were literally born yesterday and you have no idea of, the history of poultry plants, the way that they employ people, the conditions that people work in poultry plants. It's kind of, almost insulting to even put that kind of stuff out there, but that's where we are. NPR also notes that this was the third death at the Marjack plant in less than 3 years. According to an open OSHA case, a staff member died as a result of, quote, horseplay in December of 2020. The plant was fined $6,827. The Associated Press reported at the time that Joe Velasco Toto died from, quote, abdominal and pelvic trauma caused by a compressed air injury. Marjack was fined $27,306 for another death in 2021, but the company is contesting those penalties, that death being 28-year-old Bobby Butler in an accident involving heavy machinery. Before those deaths, the Labor Department in 2009, this is from the Washington Post, before those deaths, the Labor Department proposed in 2009 $379,800 in penalties against Marjack after issuing 37 serious safety and health violations. From a statement at that time, quote, Marjack Poultry Management should not wait until a serious injury or death occurs to any of its workers before making the necessary changes to its safety and health program. That company has offices in Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. And like I said at the top, this death of a 16-year-old, of a boy who's in 9th grade. This kid was in 9th grade at his high school working at a poultry plant. This death comes just 2 weeks after another 16-year-old boy died in a workplace accident at a Wisconsin sawmill. Cases like these have reignited criticisms about the use of child labor as Republican lawmakers push to relax child protections despite a surge in high-profile cases involving mostly migrant children working in some of the nation's most dangerous industries, including explicitly making it legal for children to work in dangerous industries such as coal mining. That's one of the things that they want to do. They want to make it legal for children to work in the coal mines again. Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate. They also want to, in Arkansas, one of the ways that they were relaxing child labor is negating a previous requirement to have parental consent, to have a parental consent form that the parents have to sign. Who does it help employ children if you have one less piece of paper, one less piece of documentation? That kind of bill is really better understood as, a child trafficking bill, a bill to lessen enforcement on child trafficking. It's really kind of gross stuff.
Yeah, it is. And like you said, we're seeing it in states all over the country. I know Iowa is having a lot of fights right now. And of course, Iowa has been home to some of these very same issues with child labor in the meatpacking industry. And, we've seen reporting coming out of the New York Times about children working in, state after state, including here in Alabama, where children were, working for Fruit of the Loom, I believe it was. And then we also, of course, have had children working in the Hyundai supply chain, migrant children predominantly, some of the most vulnerable folks in our society. And it's just, another symptom of this neo-gilded age that we're living through. And we thought in the labor movement that child labor was a battle that we had won. We felt like we won that fight many years ago. and here we are going backwards. And it's no coincidence that it's, predominantly migrant children that are being exploited.
Yeah.
And we do have a caller on the line for this.
Well, really quickly, I did want to, I have to mention, because we're a union radio show, and because it is a fact, and before I get into this, it's a fact that union workplaces are more safe. They are safer on average than non-union workplaces, but that's not magic, right? It's not you win a union election and then therefore by some, ephemeral quality of being recognized by the government as a union, then your workplace becomes safer. It requires dedication from the members and the leadership to make that so.
Absolutely.
And
constant vigilance and organizing, ongoing efforts. It has to be a real priority. You have to have activity to make that happen.
And while, of course, this death is mostly on the hands of the corporation, we do have to know.
And the staffing agency.
And the staffing agencies.
Let's say that too. And the fact that the corporation even resorts to staffing agencies.
Right. But we do have to know that there is a union at this plant. From what I can tell, it is the UFCW. I'm not totally sure, but I was able to find a case on the NLRB's website. I mean, you can't really, if you Google, union at this plant, there's nothing that quickly comes up, but I was able to find an NLRB case from like 1968 involving this facility and the union that represented workers there in the 60s, which was one of the unions that merged to form the UFCW. I think it was like the butchers and cutters union or something, and they merged with somebody. And so by all accounts, it is the UFCW that represents workers at this facility. And I haven't seen any statement from the UFCW on this. And that, that's wild to me. That's wild to me. Okay, Adam, you said we had a caller?
Yeah, let's get the caller on the air here. All right. We've got a 256 caller.
Hey, this is Luis. I am an organizer based in the Southeast, and I have had extensive contact with some of our comrades on the ground in Mississippi, and I wanted to let you know what I've heard so that your listeners can kind of get context for what's going on in Mississippi.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first thing I'd like to say, again, just as outraged as you are, this is a child. How does this happen? It's the United States of America, right? It's the 21st century. 100 years ago, we had an entire labor movement based around the idea that children should not have to work. They're supposed to protect these kids. And what's more egregious around what's going on in Mississippi is that this is a community that has been ravaged time and time again by these extreme climate disasters, by ice raids, by poverty. So this is insult to injury to the general community of Jackson and Hattiesburg. This child was working because he had to work, right? Because poverty in the system that we live in forced him to help provide for his family. This is not like a choice that some of these children make to have to go to work, right? Number one. Number two, the company knows on the ground. That's what organizers have told me. That's what our contacts with the community have said. Company knows that they are hiring children. They're willingly choosing to hire children, number one. Another piece of context is in 2019, there was an immigration raid that absolutely devastated the entire region. I don't know if you remember, if it was covered on your program or not, but there were about 800 workers in these very poultry plants that are in this general Jackson area that were just, they were flooded with ICE officers, and they arrested 800 people, and they deported lots of people, working class people, laborers that were not part of the union, right? So I'm very grateful that you're making a shout out to the union shop that is at this poultry plant right now. And I would invite all of the unions, all of the folks that are listening, that are part of a union to call the union that is at this shop and ask, why is the president of this union not in Mississippi right now? Why haven't they made any statements? Right? A worker died at a union shop. Like, how is this possible? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's incredibly distressing. There was just a giant storm in Mississippi as well a few weeks ago. So the offices of several of the nonprofits have been devastated. So this community, like time and time again, things have happened that just further repress the community. And again, the context being that because of everything that's happened, the local immigrant community, many undocumented folks, don't want to talk to OSHA, don't want to talk to the police because they're afraid, rightfully so, that something is going to happen. You know? So it's a really terrible situation. There's a lot of attention, a lot of media coverage nationally that's descending upon Mississippi. And so I would ask for your listeners to continue to uplift the story, because this is not the first person in the last few years that has died at a factory in Mississippi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course not. And that's, you know, what you mentioned about the fact that, you know, the families are really in a lot of ways kind of pushed into these circumstances, and that it's important to to rather than criticizing the family for this because of their condition, it's important that we, you know, the company is ultimately liable for this, and the society for, you know, for allowing people to, you know, live in such destitute kind of poverty, even though they're working, even though, you know, in a household like this, it's almost certain that both of the parents were working. He may not have been the only child even working, and yet they felt the need to, you know, to have him work as well. It's just a really, really sad state of affairs when companies like this make so much profits, especially over the course of the pandemic, taking advantage of inflation, and yet their workers are still, you know, making, in some cases, even as low as $8, $9, $10, $11 an hour. And that's just not enough to support a family.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the working conditions themselves at these poultry plants, I've been there myself. I've seen it with my very eyes. They're incredibly dangerous, right? Like, number one, no child should be working in these types of places. It is against the law, right? And it is the company's responsibility to ensure, number one, that no children are working in their factory. Obviously, we've been fighting for it for 100 years. Number two, that the places are safe. People don't have to die in factories. They're not supposed to anyway, right? We are not beholden to this capitalist system to have to sacrifice our children in our bodies for profit, right? The reason that this happened, the singular reason that a child that was 16-year-old, that was an immigrant, he was indigenous, he came to the United States fleeing violence, the reason that he died is because a company was seeking profit, and they did not ensure the safety at the factory, period, end stop, right? So what I want your listeners to hear from me and from my tone and from my community is that you need to be incredibly angry at this situation. You need to be enraged that children are working throughout the Southeast, specifically at factories that are dangerous. And secondly, that they're dying, right? Why are there not riots in the streets, right? Children are dying at factories.
Yeah, absolutely. Luis, thanks for the call. Is there anything else that you think folks ought to know about this situation, this community?
Yeah, I would just amplify that there is a union, right, at this shop. I would say, again, it's kind of shameful that they haven't shown up in a meaningful way so far. I don't know what the situation is. I can't speak to the specific union that's there, but I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that the community there has not been touched by that union. And if the union is there, it is the union's responsibility to show up for this community, 100%. That's what solidarity means. And if the union isn't doing that work right now, they need to get on it, because they're losing a lot of credibility nationally. So please send resources to the organization that you had mentioned earlier, because they need a lot of help right now.
The Immigrant Alliance for Justice and Equity.
Exactly, yeah, and I think that you can find the link on their webpage. They're currently trying to organize on the ground and doing really transformational work in that community.
Thanks for the call, Luis. Appreciate it. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.